Have you ever had one of those days that the harder you try, the worse it gets? A lady at the airport stopped by the little convenience store stand to buy a Kit Kat. And the idea was that she would eat it while she was waiting on her plane. In the crowded waiting area, she spied an empty seat at the end of one of the rows, and she rushed to get to it and got all of her bags kind of arranged as you do, making sure that nothing gets stolen, and you're arranging all of her stuff. She got everything arranged and sat down and looked over at the fellow sitting beside her and noticed that he was eating her Kit Kat bar. And she was surprised, and she thought, well, I've never seen such gall in a person. So she glared at him. And then finally she said, that's my Kit Kat. And so she reached over and broke off a piece and ate it, and he broke off a piece and ate it, and it got into this little competition. And finally the Kit Kat bar was gone, and after a few moments of silence, the man got up and left and came back with another Kit Kat bar. He unwrapped it, broke off a piece and started eating, and she reached over and broke off a piece and started eating it too. And just like the first time, it was almost a race to see who could break off and finish the Kit Kat bar first. They sat there when it was over in stunned silence. She did. Just every once in a while, turning to glare at him. Why would somebody be so rude as to steal her Kit Kat bar? Then, over the intercom, the announcement came that her plane was ready for boarding. She opened her purse to get her boarding pass, and to her utter embarrassment, found her Kit Kat bar. She had eaten half of 2 of his candy bars while hers was still in her purse. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? You know, the older I get, the more I realize that if you could kick the person responsible for most of your troubles in the backside, you wouldn't be able to sit down for a little while. Life, one of those days. Perhaps you've had that kind of year. I think the disciples in John chapter 14 may be feeling just a little bit this way. They had just come through the triumphal entry into Jerusalem earlier that week with a great adulation. The crowds were cheering. The crowds were saying, Hosanna to the King. They were waving palm branches. And even the chief priest who had been plotting against Christ and cried out in despair to one another, what can we do? The whole world seems to have gone after him. But Jesus, you know, Jesus had not come to establish an earthly kingdom, and he refused to crown, and disappointment and dismay, no doubt, dashed the dreams of the disciples of a Jewish kingdom on earth. As soon as the priests were out of that scenario, out of the situation there on Palm Sunday, they were once again seeking someone to betray Jesus into their hands, and they find one willing in Judas, and really that's where we begin in chapter 14. Judas likely has left the upper room when Jesus turns to his disciples in the middle of all of this chaos, and Jesus says, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know. Then Thomas. Do you like Thomas, or do you have a bad opinion of Thomas? I kind of like Thomas. I think Thomas is a whole lot like a lot of us. Then Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. Had I been Jesus right there, I would have stood up from the table and said, I've had it with you guys. You guys are a bunch of numbskulls. You guys, I've been talking to you for the last 3 years about what I'm going to do. I have been very clear that I'm not going to establish an earthly kingdom, that my kingdom's not of this world. And here you are again, not understanding any of this. Thomas says, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Then Jesus gives these very familiar words. Why don't you quote them with me? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. This morning I want us to focus on those words there in chapter 14 and verse 6, where Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, I am the way. As I read those words this morning again for probably the 100th time, the thought came to my mind, the way to what? I know Thomas had just said that we don't know where you're going. We don't know your plans. We know that you're talking about preparing a place. But the way to what? Well, Jesus had just talked about a place. He said, I go to prepare a place for you. And I might just stop there long enough this morning to remind us that there is a place that he is preparing for us. It's not a state of mind. It's not some pie in the sky theology. It's not just something that weak-minded Christians hold on to help us get through difficult circumstances. We know from the authority of God's word that there is a place that he has gone to prepare. It's a prepared place. It's a divine geographical location. You say, President, you know where it's at. I have no idea where it's at. But I do believe that there's a place. But not only did he say that he was going to prepare a place, but he says, I am talking specifically about my Father's house, because he says, in my Father's house are what? Well, the King James says, many mansions. Can I disappoint you this morning? That's not what it says in the original language. It actually is translated, it should be translated, in my Father's house are many rooms. Some of you are like, I don't know, I don't like that. I like the idea of a mansion over the hilltop, right? I like the idea of my own little space. I like my idea of, hey, you can come over if you want to, but if I don't want you to come, you're not coming over to my mansion. I don't know. Jesus, what he was talking about is in the ancient Near East, and when there was an expansion in the family, a room was added to the house. And so you weren't just a person staying in a guest quarter way off down the back pasture. You were actually in Father's house. That ought to bring us excitement, friends. I like the idea of a mansion, but I like the idea of being in Father's house a whole lot more. And by the way, his house will be a mansion too. He says, in my Father's house. Jesus says, if you want to get there, if you want to get to this prepared place, if you want to go to Father's house, I am the way. Now, some of you, like me, are saying to yourself, okay, he's the way to heaven. He's the way to a specific place. He's a way to Father's house, but that really doesn't help me this morning. Hold on, though. Look at the opening 2 words of this passage in chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus says what? I am. I am. Earlier, Jesus, in response to the Pharisees' question, they asked him, who do you think that you are? And he says, your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day, and he saw it and was glad. They said, you're not yet 50 years old, And yet you say you've seen Abraham, and Jesus said, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was born, I am. That didn't make them happy. They picked up stones to stone him, Scripture says in John chapter 8, and Jesus hid himself and slipped away from the temple grounds. The violent response of the Jews to Jesus' statement of I am shows how clearly they understood what he was declaring, that he was the eternal God incarnate. Jesus was equating himself with the I am title that God gave himself in Exodus chapter 3. And this indicates to us this morning that the way that Jesus is referring to is following him. I am the way. You want to make it, you've got to follow my teachings. You want to make it to Father's house, you got to follow my example. You want to make it to Father's house, you got to follow the plan that I have laid out before you. I've made it very clear. I've spent 3.5 years with you delineating the rules to the kingdom that I've been trying to establish. Not an earthly kingdom, a heavenly kingdom. You want to know the way? I am. And for the disciples, it was both physical and philosophical, following him. You know, it matters who or what you're following, doesn't it? I was listening to the news several years ago, one morning in the kitchen, and the year was, I think, 2017. I hadn't been here very long. And the tunnel right here on 71, the tunnel that goes under part of downtown Cincinnati, had been closed for some kind of work, and a semi, a tractor trailer, had made its way down 71 and noticed that it was closed and decided at the last minute to get off the exit, and he did, and somehow this semi made it up into Mount Adams. Now, how many know where Mount Adams is? We're in Mount Auburn here. The hill right over there where Eden Park is Mount Adams. Actually, if you go back up in the neighborhood, there's a great UDF over there, by the way, that a lot of people don't know about, and it's a great spot. If you need to go on a date or something, that's a good spot to go on a date. And anyway, if you've ever been there, you know the streets are about as wide as this pulpit. I mean, they are narrow. Here is a tractor trailer with a 53-foot trailer on the back, trying to navigate those streets. He was wiping out cars. He would turn corners and the trailer would catch a car and just sling it out of the way. And he was running over fire hydrants and at one point backed into a building and crushed the front doors of a building. And the police were called and they were forced to get license plate numbers and call residents and say, hey, this is in the middle of the night, we need you to move your car. There's a semi stuck right here on your street. And I think it was 6 hours later, with the police and fire department working, helping, they finally got him out of there. The truck driver said, I was just trying to follow my GPS. Oh, my. I challenge you. In fact, why don't you do it right now? Pull out your phones and Google top 10 GPS failures. And just look at them for a moment. I mean, they're hilarious. At people driving down boat ramps right into the water. It's like, you didn't see the water? Others, a fellow drove into a construction zone, right into a large sand pile, following his GPS. Another couple drove into the Pacific Ocean, trying to find their way. I read about one guy who drove into a telephone pole. He said, I was just trying to follow my GPS. Man, that makes me nervous. Driving down the road, just wondering how many of you are just looking at this little screen rather than this big road in front of you. You see any? Can I tell you this morning that it's natural for humans to want to know where they're going? We make plans. We follow maps. We have GPSs on our phones. We want to know where we're going. We want to know how we're going to get there. We want to know when we're going to get there. But that's not only true with our physical lives. We also feel that same way spiritually, don't we? This is why probably one of the most popular questions of young people your age is, how can I know God's will for my life? What is that? They want to know direction. I want to know the plans. I want to know. I just want my life figured out. What is the next step for me? What career should I pursue? Does God have a call on my life? Questions. Can I challenge you to change your focus? Rather than trying to plot the course you should take, rather than trying to figure out a call on your life, can I just ask you to pursue Christ? If you pursue Christ, he says, I'm the way. All of these other things will find their proper place in your life. Jesus in John chapter 8 and verse 31 said to the Jews who believed on him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It's a liberating thing to embrace the truth, pursue Christ. And these other things will come into their proper focus. He says, I am the way. Then he says, I am the truth. Now, I think it's important for us to understand the context of these words. Jesus, remember, is talking to the disciples in the upper room. Judas likely has left the room, and now Jesus is focusing on the remaining disciples to provide comfort. It's right before the trial. This is right on the eve of when Jesus is betrayed and when he is accused and goes to trial. Then you remember Jesus is arrested. This is just hours after he says this to the disciples. He's arrested and he's brought before Pontius Pilate. And there are many false accusations brought against Christ there, and blasphemy and, trying to set up a revolt. And I don't think those accusations are what bothered Pilate the most. I think the one accusation that bothered Pilate the most, or at least seems to capture his attention, is that Jesus claimed to be king. Because Pilate asked him, looks at Jesus, this sham trial's going on, and he looks at Jesus and he says, are you the king of the Jews? And I wish Jesus in the human would have said, they haven't messed up. My kingdom's not here, Pilate. My kingdom's up there. But Jesus didn't say that. He says, you say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the what? Truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate then responds with a question. That question has been asked by nearly every person that's come into existence. What is truth? But Jesus had already provided that answer in John 14 when he says, I am the truth. What he was saying is, my example, my teachings, everything that I've demonstrated before you, all of this is the truth. Do you ever find yourself asking, what is truth? Well, maybe we ought to rephrase that question and say this way. What is true? How many, let's just take an informal poll. How many have, let me see how I want to ask this. How many believe that the recent video of Princess Kate is real? Surely somebody believes it's real. I believe it's real. Remember, she announced she has cancer. How many believe it's real or it's fake? How many think it's fake? All right, a few of you think it's fake. They finally had to come out recently and say, no, this is not some AI-generated thing. British Broadcasting Network actually recorded this video. It wasn't done by the Buckingham Palace. Why? People are, oh, it's fake. This is really not her. Did you notice one eyebrow's higher than the other? Did you notice that she's missing this? Did you notice all of these things? Or these other things? You know, is this real? Is this fake? We don't know. In fact, one of your favorite social media platforms tries to take the fake out of social media. How many use Be Real? Raise your hand, don't be ashamed. You use Be Real. How many pictures do you actually take before you post it? I know it tells on you. I understand that. This is edited. They took 17 pictures, whatever it happens to be. It's not real either. Because we got to get the pose just right. In my family, it's like, oh, no, it's Be Real time. It's Be Real time. Everybody, you know, just make sure your tie's up, make sure your coat's buttoned, and make sure you're smiling because you have no idea whether you're going to be in the picture or not. It's not real. I'm not going to let them take a picture of me on Be Real when I'm sitting in my recliner after a long day. And one of my favorite things to do, I don't even know I'm doing it, but I mess with my hair, and my hair will just stand up. I look like Bart Simpson, you know, just... I'm not going to take a picture of me and put that on Be Real. Dr. Phil, you don't have that problem. I'm sorry. Honestly, you know, I wish I were bald. That's been a dream of mine since I was like 18. I do. I just shave my head and never comb this mop again. It's a trial of my life. What's real? Friends, in a world that's filled with fakes, Jesus says, I'm the truth. When you look at him, when you look at his words, he will not disappoint you. I am the truth. Then he says, I'm the life. What did Jesus mean by that? I am the life. This calls to mind the words of Jesus in John 10 when he says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come, Jesus says, I have come that you might have life and have it abundantly. He goes on and says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for my sheep. Now, that may not do a whole lot for you, but I want you to see in this, I am the life. Notice the defense that Christ provides for us here. We're talking about life specifically related to Christ. Notice the defense. He says, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. I've come to lay my life down. You see the opposite? What should that indicate to us is this, friends, that life is not about you. It's about being so committed to the heavenly cause that you're willing to do whatever is required of you by Jesus. Notice not only the defense, but notice the direction. My sheep know my voice and follow. Are you following him? What are you talking about? I'm talking about life. True life is following Jesus. True living is following the voice of the shepherd. True living is resting in the care of the shepherd. True living is embracing the truth of the shepherd. You want to know what life is? That's what life is. It's following him. It doesn't matter what everyone around us is doing. I'm following the shepherd. It doesn't matter what I'm going through right now. It may be difficult. It may be heavy. Somebody may have stolen my Kit Kat bar. I may have stolen their Kit Kat bar. It doesn't matter. I'm resting in the care of the shepherd. But my life is consumed with embracing the truth of the shepherd. That's life. not what the world says life is. You know, the world has all kinds of definitions of what real living is. On the south side of Chicago, in the early to mid-'80s, there were a couple of men with some pretty bad reputations. Fluky Stokes and his son, Willie the Wimp. True names, I'm not making this up. They were thugs. I mean, they beat people up. They were drug dealers and very successful drug dealers. And they controlled the south side of Chicago. And finally, in 1984, Willie the Wimp was shot and killed. And his dad, listen to these words. I read this morning. His dad threw a funeral. I've never heard it that way, but after reading the description, I think those are apt words. We throw parties. His dad threw a funeral. Thousands of people were invited to Willie the Wimp's funeral, and even more just invited themselves. They wanted to go and see what would happen, and it didn't disappoint. Willie the Wimp was buried in a Cadillac Seville. You ever seen anybody buried in a Cadillac? I haven't. He was buried in a Cadillac Seville. He was embalmed and placed upright in the driver's seat with his hands on the steering wheel, with diamond rings on his fingers and $100 bills in between his fingers as he was holding onto the wheel. And I read one account where $100 bills were falling out of his pockets. And this was a spectacle to behold. The lights on the Seville were on, it tells us, as it was used for his casket. It was such an inspiring event that one of the spectators or mourners, I'm not sure which, wrote a song. And I read it this morning and I was just amused, and I thought I'd share it with you. Ready? Willie the Wimp was buried today. They laid him to rest in a special way. Sent him off in the finest style. That casket mobile really drove them wild. Southside Chicago will think of him often, talking about Willie the Wimp in his Cadillac coffin. That casket, it looked like a fine Seville. He had a vanity license and a Cadillac grill. Willie was propped up in the driver's seat. He had diamonds on his finger and smiling sweet. A fine red suit had the whole town talking about Willie the Wimp in his Cadillac coffin. Old Cadillac went to heaven. He was waving the banner. He left like he lived, in a lively manner, with a $100 bill and his fingers held tight. He had flowers for wheels and a flashing headlight. He had been wishing for wings. No way he was walking, talking about Willie the Wimp in his Cadillac coffin. The story's even better, though, because as that Cadillac was lowered into the ground, one of the onlookers said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Now that's living." I don't think any of you caught that. He's dead. He just happens to be embalmed in a Cadillac Seville. And one of the onlookers looks at that scene and says, "That's living." No, friends, it's not. Jesus offers a better way. Remember, true living is following the voice of the shepherd. True living is embrace in the care of the shepherd. And true living is embracing the truth of the shepherd. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, the life. No man, no woman comes to the Father except through me." Father.
We're glad you joined us. God's Bible School and College prepares students for lives of ministry wherever God calls them. This content is possible because of the generous support of friends like you. To support GBSC, visit giving.gbs.edu. Thank you.